Mario Fraioli, welcome to Second Nature, buddy. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Aaron Luzzi, I just have to say, Mario Fraioli, potentially my biggest influence as a running media personality here. He is the founder, creator, author, and host of the Morning Shakeout newsletter and podcast. One of the most bright, shining minds, and also a person of great character in the sport of trail running. So it's a pleasure to introduce you to here on the podcast. And I'm just really excited for this conversation. There's few people that are more connected in the sport of running, both in terms of what's happening in professional racing, but also what's happening on the industry side. Mario is a solo operator himself, so we got a lot to talk about here today.
That's quite the introduction. I
That
think
was quite the introduction. I'm just going to step aside right now. I don't think I can add anything to that. So,
Well,
thanks for having me.
yeah, I just have to say, okay, so one of the reasons why we're doing this episode now, of course, we've wanted to have you on for a long time, is that you just eclipsed 500 sends of your amazing newsletter. Again, the Morning Shakeout. I am a day one subscriber. I have to be among your most open and click rate readers over time. And I'm just a big admirer of what you're doing. So we're going to talk about that here today. But actually, I think the place that I wanted to start, Mario, I just read something about how when you're building a business, you have to think about building for lifestyle first and forget about the other metrics that are usually associated with business, revenue, profit, etc. And I feel like you, of all people, have done that so well, especially compared to me. So start there. Talk about optimizing for lifestyle and what that's meant as you've built your business solo.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, what's the old Jay-Z quote? I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. And I mean, I've used that as kind of a guiding light for as long as I've been self-employed, which is going on 10 years now, because aside from publishing the Morning Shakeout newsletter and podcast, what I've been doing, I mean, alongside of that, preceding that, is coaching athletes. And people don't come to me just looking for a coach because they want to finish a marathon. They come to me looking for Mario Fraioli to coach them. People don't read the Morning Shakeout or listen to the Morning Shakeout podcast just because it's a nice generalized roundup of things that are going on. They want Mario's take on things. So I try to keep that sort of front of mind. And I've never really like thought of these things too strategically, I think, from a business standpoint. They're things that I would do even if you didn't pay me for them. So it is very much a lifestyle thing. But in order to be able to do that, I have to generate revenue. So I do have to think like a business. And so I've used that just kind of to sort of shape my perspective and path these past, 10 or so years.
I think there's a fair level of survivorist bias when it comes to some of this stuff, right? Like now it makes sense, the business and everything. But could you take me back to sort of day one of this stuff? Where did this actually kick off? And what was that first moment where you're like, oh, I can be a business?
So to go way back would have to be like 2006 or so. I was 2 years out of college. I was trying to run at a semi-professional to professional level. I was working little odd jobs basically to just pay my bills so that I could pursue this running thing. And I started working at a newspaper, answering the phone in the sports department. This was my local newspaper that I grew up with. I had just moved back from Oregon, where I kind of failed in my initial foray to make it as a runner, and I needed a job. So I was answering phones in the sports department for minimum wage, which I think at the time was like maybe $9 an hour or something like that. Not enough to pay the bills, but seemed like a cool job. It was 16 hours a week. And I supplemented that by working in the newspaper's telemarketing department, literally trying to hawk the newspaper to people. I eventually picked up hours at a running store. And again, this was all kind of to pay the bills. But the whole time I was thinking, ideally, I would love to work for myself as a writer and a coach. Those are the things that I was most interested in. I had no idea how I was going to put myself on that path, but I just kind of, kept pursuing things that interested me. And eventually I started freelancing for a bunch of different publications. I was doing articles for New England Runner, Running Times, Runner's World, Triathlete Magazine, eventually Competitor, where I went on to work. I started coaching people through the running store. I mean, we'd have customers who came in and said, "Hey, I'm training for my first 5K. Can you help me?" And I was, "Sure, I'm happy to help you out." I didn't charge anyone any money for it. It's just something that I really enjoyed doing. I was like, I like doing these things. I like writing about running. I like helping other runners to achieve their goals. Like my dream would be to be able to do this for myself someday. But I had no idea if that was even possible or how to do it. So those seeds were planted pretty early on, almost 20 years ago at this point. And, eventually things just started to materialize. I got an opportunity to go on staff at Competitor Magazine, which at the time was the second biggest running publication here in the US. I started coaching a group of runners in San Diego, had the opportunity to coach an athlete to the Olympic Games in 2012, and that snowball kind of just kept rolling to the point in 2016 where I had a decision to make, and I had the opportunity to try and make a go at this for myself, just to work for myself as a coach and a writer. And I have been able to do that. It was not that easy or straightforward. There are a lot of different, kind of detours that I took and things that I had to do to keep myself, on that path. But now that's what I've largely been doing for myself the last 7 years or so.
So, Mario, I was thinking about this today as I was just kind of noodling on things that we were going to talk about. And again, you and I have known each other for a long time. I'm a day one subscriber. And I think I recall back in the day you sharing with me something that was inspiring you in how you were thinking about forming your newsletter. Again, this is before it launched. And I guess we should say, too, newsletters in recent years have become so popular in terms of allowing people to develop an audience and share their perspective with the world. You are very much ahead of your time in that department. But I know you were influenced. I think it was either by Ben Thompson at Stratechery or by Daring Fireball, wasn't it? Wasn't it one of those two tech newsletters?
Both of those, and another guy named Dave Pell, who puts out a newsletter called Next Draft. And I started the Morning Shakeout in November of 2015. By no means did I start newsletters. They've been around for a long time. I mean, probably early 2000s, if not sooner in some way, shape, or form, but they're not what they are now. Substack didn't exist, Button Down didn't exist, Beehive didn't exist. Like all these ways to send out a newsletter and build community and reach your readers did not exist. It was basically Tiny Letter, MailChimp, or you could hack something together yourself, Constant Contact, that type of thing.
Or you literally attach a PDF to your to your listserv.
Yeah. And I mean, to go back even further, back to those early 2000s days, as I was putting myself on this path, I was an early blogger in the 2000s, and running blogs were a thing back then. There was a whole network of them, and that's part of my attraction to Substack today, which we can talk about, I'm sure, later in this conversation. But I was an early running blogger in the 2000s. I mean, even in college, before I had my own blog, I was contributing to one called runinsight.com, which was hosted by a guy in Ohio who was really into like D2, D3 track and field and cross country. And I was a D2 athlete and also the professional side of the sport. And I was contributing what were essentially opinion columns to his website and also posting my training log there with my coach's permission in college. And then eventually I started doing that on my own domain, which I did for like 3 to 4 years. So, I mean, I've always just sort of enjoyed that personal type of writing for a relatively small but engaged audience. And, there was a gap where I didn't do that for a while. And I had started noodling on the idea for the Morning Shakeout in probably like 2013 or so. And I bought the domain, I think, in 2013, but I wasn't sure what it was going to be. If I was going to create a blog called The Morning Shakeout, if I was going to send it as a newsletter, which is what I ultimately ended up doing. I even thought about doing a physical zine for a while, but I wanted to do something in that spirit of blogging. And eventually I decided on the newsletter route. And in some ways, like now I'm like, yeah, I was a little bit ahead of my time because we're in this like wave of newsletters. Everyone has a newsletter now. It's easier than ever to do. But it's always been a form of writing and communication really that I've gravitated toward for a long, long time.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into the why, and specifically, what was your hope launching the newsletter, and where did you expect it to go versus where it is today?
So when I launched the Morning Shakeout, the reason I did so is because I wanted my own creative outlet where I could write about whatever it was that I wanted to write about. And I was on staff at Competitor Magazine at the time as a senior editor, and we had a content plan. I mean, we covered events. I was in charge of all of our training content. We interviewed athletes, but we had a playbook that we had to follow. And some of the things that I wanted to do related to running didn't, even though we had a running website, didn't fit in there. Like I couldn't really be that opinionated on the website. There were people that I wanted to interview but didn't really fit in with our plan. And I was like, I just want to do this for myself. And so I decided to do it and ultimately kicked it off. I didn't ask anyone for permission. I was aware that it was probably going to be scrutinized, which it sort of was. But I was like, I need to do this for myself. But I also had other things that I was interested in that had nothing to do with running that I wanted to like this. That's what I used to do when I blogged. I wanted a place to be able to publish those things and share with other people who might also be interested in those things, because that creates conversation and dialogue. And that's always been interesting to me. So that was really my goal when I started it back in 2015.
So now I want to ask you, mentioning the fact that you were writing opinion columns. I know this is something that you've wrestled with over time. You're somebody who I think is always really cognizant of holding yourself to a standard of ethics. It's one of the reasons why I think so many of us really look up to you. And I know you became disillusioned with that sort of hot take, be provocative thing that's emerged on the internet that I think we've all experienced to one degree or another. Share a little bit about that, because I think in today's modern media environment, to intentionally move against that trend oftentimes means that you're sacrificing engagement and therefore sacrificing business opportunities at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, we all have opinions, right? Some of us choose to share them and some of us don't. And for a long time, I wanted to share my opinions because I felt that I could back them up. I mean, I majored in philosophy in college. Part of what I liked about majoring in philosophy is I could make an argument, and as long as I could back up that argument, I wasn't going to fail, right? And I think of opinion writing in the same way. I can form an opinion on something, and as long as I can back up that opinion, you might not agree with it. I may be right, I may be wrong, but I can at least back up the argument that I'm making, and I think a lot of it, stemmed from that. And that type of writing always draws a reaction, right? I think it's meant to. There's a reason newspaper columnist jobs were very coveted back when newspapers were kind of a main form of media. And it's, from an ego perspective, and especially these days, like a dopamine perspective, like it feels good when people are talking about the stuff that you've written. And that is the most surefire way to get people talking about your stuff, is to take a stance on something. And I really enjoyed that for a while, and I thought I was quite good at it. And I think I could still be good at it if I wanted to do it. But this day and age, when everyone can have an opinion, and I think the space, and in my specific space being running, competitive running, the industry of running, it just has turned into a shouting match and not really much of a conversation. And it sort of lost its appeal for me because of that.
I was reading your article that you wrote about writing 500 consecutive newsletters. And one of the things, you talk about sort of the ups and downs of this whole thing and kind of having to right the ship a couple times. Do you feel like right now that you sort of have what it takes to make it another 500? Like, do you feel like you have the tools in place, or do you feel like you're going to have to solve new problems for the next 500?
Oh, I'm not thinking about the next 500, but I'm going to have to solve new problems. That's just the nature of doing this sort of thing, because everything evolves. the newsletter space itself will evolve, the tools will evolve, where people want to put their attention will evolve. And if I want to continue doing that, I'm going to have to evolve with it or try to get ahead of it to some degree. And I say that only based on experience working online and on the internet now for 20 plus years at this point. It's evolved over the past 20 plus years, and it's going to evolve even more over the next 20 plus years. So whether or not I do another 500 or another 100 or 50 or whatever it happens to be, like there's going to be an evolution, and it might be subtle in some ways, or there might be some, some wholesale changes. I don't know what that's going to be at this point, but I expect to have to evolve. Yeah, for sure.
It feels to me that the product has evolved over time, but not dramatically. In
That's
that,
correct.
as you said at the beginning, it's Mario Fraioli's perspective on running, but also a lot of other things. And it's kind of been that over time, even if maybe you've moved away from doing more editorial stuff. It is sort of a singular product. So I think one of the things that I'd certainly love to hear you talk about is just the consistent practice of sending 500 newsletters on 500 consecutive weeks, and the analog it has obviously with being successful in anything, sports or otherwise. So, it's, I think, just a good moment to celebrate this accomplishment and talk about what you've learned by just being so consistent for 10 years.
Biggest thing I've learned is that I still love doing it. Otherwise, I would stop, and I wouldn't do it every Monday. It's become just part of what I do on a week to week basis, and it's as much for me as it is for all the people who read it. I mean, for me, writing has always been how I clarify my thinking, and I am also someone who consumes a lot of content during the week. So that's my opportunity to sit down on Monday and kind of look back at all these things that I've read, watched, listened to, thought about, whatever, over the course of the week, and like make sense of it all, for myself. And I'm doing that throughout the week, and everything that I write goes into an Apple Notes file, and there's chicken scratch in there, and just like quotes that I've pulled out, some quick thoughts that I have. And then I sit down on Monday and I just kind of like take all of these pieces and, sort of put it together. And so for me personally, like it's a foundational kind of weekly exercise to think about these things that I've been consuming oftentimes because I'm looking to better myself in some way or inform myself in some way. And then I can in turn share that with, with other people. And I enjoy it. I really, really enjoy it. I think it adds a lot just to my life, personally. I know through the feedback that I get that it adds a lot to my readers' lives as well. And as long as it's kind of doing those two things, whether or not it's part of how I make my living or not, I'm going to continue doing it. And as long as it's interesting to me, I'm going to continue doing it. And I never thought about 500. I'm not thinking about the next 500. I just know that next Monday I'm going to sit down and I'm going to go through this, pile of stuff that's in my Apple Notes file, and I'm going to try to make sense of it. And it's important for me that I do that. And that's been something that has evolved over time. So I was not thinking about it that way at the very beginning, but it definitely became that as I started to get these weeks under my belt. I'm like, oh, this is actually doing something for me that I didn't anticipate at the outset. And so it's evolved in that way. And some of that I think is visible if you've been reading long enough. From the actual like content itself and structure, it's mostly the same. If you go back to issue 1, I remember I let off with 5 things. I was like, I'm gonna put 5 things in here. And the first thing I wrote about was a Facebook post that Shannon Robery, who was an Olympian and one of the top middle distance runners at the time, wrote. That was just like it was just a bunch of horse shit. And I just called it out as horse shit. And I mean, that was me being opinionated, and that was the biggest part of the piece. And then the other 4 were just things that I found, some of which were running related, some of which weren't, that I found interesting. I remember, like, it's crazy that I remember this without even looking at it. I remember Tracksmith did a piece about Franklin Park, which is a famous cross country course in Boston, which was awesome. And this was before Tracksmith was a partner of the Morning Shakeout or anything. I was just an early fan of what they were doing. I was like, this is cool. And it happens to be that a brand put it out and not a media outlet. I think more people should see this. I put that in
Mm.
there. As I mentioned a little while ago, I was a philosophy major in college. I had just kind of started listening to podcasts in 2015 or so, and I found a philosophy podcast that I really liked, and I put a link to that in there. And I mean, fast forward 500 weeks, I'm largely still doing
Still
that. I
doing
mean,
that.
the newsletter itself has expanded quite a bit, and I've added some things. Like I added workout of the week. I have a bottom line quote that I've put in there for 300 plus weeks now. And, you know, I've added a few things and tweaked some things here and there. Eventually I added photos and that sort of thing. But like the kind of the core of it of like, hey, here's Mario sharing things that he has been paying attention to and finds interesting and giving his 2 cents on it. That's been there since week one, and that's really the main foundation of the newsletter, and that's held true for 500 weeks now.
I learned a word recently, autotelic, and it's this concept of doing stuff for the sake of doing it, which seems like that's sort of the core of like this is a practice that you've been doing for your own sake. It just so happens that nearly, I don't know, 15 to 20,000 people also enjoy what you're putting out, and it's been this idea. It seems like long term consistency over short term intensity. I've got to wonder though, over those 500 releases, is there an era that you kind of look back on fondly where things were just hitting just right, or I don't know, maybe it was a struggle too? Is there anything that really stands out to you over this time, or has it been just kind of consistent, like +1 the entire time?
Oh no, 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 no. It's been a roller coaster. I mean, I feel like right now it's flowing more easily and naturally than it has at any point over the past 10 years. Early on when I didn't know what I was doing and it was pure exploration. I mean, those were cool times too, 'cause I was just trying stuff and seeing like kind of what stuck and what didn't, and making adjustments based on that. But I've had some pretty low moments where I was going to stop doing the thing. It just wasn't fun anymore. And I touched on that in this most recent issue where I felt like I needed to have an opinion on major things that were happening in running because I had kind of like made a name for myself doing that. And again, like that's the stuff that really generates discussion, and again, like makes your ego feel good and gives you like that sort of dopamine hit. And who doesn't want more and more of that until you get to the point where you're like, I don't know that I want more of this anymore. It's not really serving me pretty well. And I had mentioned how back in 2021 when an athlete named Shelby Houlihan got busted for doping, and it happened on a Monday when which is the day that I write the newsletter, and I felt like I needed to have an opinion on it and get that out for the next morning because everyone else was going to be talking about this anyway, and I knew I was going to have emails from people saying, hey, did you see the Shelby news? What did you think about the Shelby news? And I put that pressure on myself, and that wasn't fun. I was just like, I'm not doing this for me because I really care what my opinion is on this. I'm doing this because I think other people want to know what I have to say about it. And I think if you do that for too long, and I definitely there were other instances of that as well, it kind of loses some of the appeal and it becomes a bit of a chore. And, if you constantly have that pressure on yourself, like you just want to relieve yourself of it. And I realized that I needed to relieve myself of it. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be able to continue doing this thing. And I really wanted to continue doing this thing. So I had to kind of reimagine my relationship to it.
So, speaking more specifically about moments where you question whether you would keep going, I think this is, for me, something that I've dealt with a number of times in the course of Free Trail's only, call it 5-year history. And, it's always hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Like, what has kept you going? Is it simply just the fact that it is autotelic, that you're doing it for yourself at the end of the day and you realign with that and the flow comes back?
I think a lot of it is that, but it's not only that. I mean, a big part of it is my wife. When I've told her, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. It's too hard. I'm not having fun with it. She's like, and this is several years in at this point.
Yeah.
She's like, this is what you've always wanted to do. You found a way to make it work. You're really going to give this up now to go work for someone else. Like, give me a break. Like, just stick with it. Like, reimagine your relationship to it. And I've had to do that a number of times. And some of it is not just what I was writing about. It was, workflow and taking on too many things. As I mentioned, like, I've been like, coaching is like my main, I would say, how I spend most of my working time, I would say, is coaching. And Dylan, you know me pretty well at this point, and some of the athletes that I've coached and how I work with those athletes. It's pretty intensive and time consuming. And there was a few periods of time where I just wasn't managing my time well, and I would get to Monday and I was so overwhelmed from catching up with my athletes over the weekend because I felt like I needed to be there for them at the start of the week. And I would start writing the newsletter at like 4 or 5 in the afternoon when your wife just wants to have dinner and you're freaking tired. And, you're like, oh, is it worth it to do this? Like, I could just stop. No one's going to miss, that it's gone. I've had those moments, like, many a time. And my wife's given me a kick in the ass and said, no, this is what you've always wanted to do. Like, figure out a way to make it fit better. And so I've had to do that a few times over the years. And now I'm finally at a point like 10 years in where I think I've kind of figured that out, at least for my current, workload, where I can devote the right amount of time and headspace to this thing without feeling overwhelmed by other stuff. And that's made it feel, more sustainable. But there were points in the middle years, I would say, especially, where I was probably trying to do too many things at once, and like none of it was enjoyable because you just don't feel like you're giving your full self to, in my case, like all my athletes from a coaching standpoint, to this newsletter for the periods of time that I'm going to work on it each week. And that's when I think things got really, really hard and I didn't want to do it anymore. But when I really look back at it, it was like, yeah, this is just something that is a part of me and I feel like I need to do. I just need to find the space for it and really allow for that.
It's so funny. There's analogs to all different aspects of life here too, right? Like, it's like going through an injury if you're an athlete. It's like if you're with, we're all married guys here on the program. So, when you have a long-term relationship, there's going to be ups and downs, but that it's about kind of weathering those storms and then you come out stronger on the other side. It's the same is true when you've had a newsletter for 10 years, I guess.
Yeah,
Seriously. Shout out to all three of our wives, because Mario, I'm listening to you say this about your wife, like giving you a kick in the butt and like telling you to, stick it out. And I've felt that exact same thing. My wife has put me back on track so many times when I've had those low moments. It's big shout out to all three of our wives. They are huge source of inspiration and motivation.
Yeah, I think for all of us, since we do have our own things, it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, I'm sure there's nothing else you'd rather be doing, Aaron, and I know, Dylan, there's nothing else that you'd rather be doing, but there's times where you're like, I want to be doing anything but this.
Like,
and you have
give me a W-2 and some health insurance. My God, that sounds beautiful.
Oh, multiple times. I mean, I've had publications reach out to me and ask if I wanted to come on as the editor-in-chief or a content director type of thing. And here's a nice salary and benefits and all this stuff. I'm like, this would just be so much easier. And it's tempting. And Christine's like, really? Like, you've always wanted to work for yourself. Like, she had to remind me of what I told myself, almost 20 years ago, of like, oh, this would be my, eventual goal would be to be able to do this for myself. And it's just, the nature of it is it's hard. Like, it's really hard. And I need to remind myself, like, it's okay that it's hard. And like, one of my training principles that I have to remind myself of all the time, because it doesn't come naturally, is like, you learn how to handle hard better. Like, it's always going to be hard. And you just have to welcome that. And, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but this is related. Dylan, I know you know Mike Wolf really, really well from your North Face days.
Yeah.
And I got to meet him back, oh man, I think it was shortly after I started the newsletter, like 2016, when he and Hal Corner were making their rounds for the JMT film that they had put together. And I was the MC for their event in Chicago. So I got to hang out with them for the entire weekend, and we stayed in touch. And Mike and I were emailing one day. I think he actually may have replied to the Morning Shakeout, and I can't remember what we were talking about, but I asked him, how's your family? How's work, all this stuff, because they were getting their, I think it was like mountain athletics or something off the ground.
Yep.
And he goes, Mario, and I have this like posted at my desk still, shit does not get less complicated.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn, that's really profound. I just wrote it down. I put it on
Yeah.
my desk and I look at it every day. Shit does not get less complicated. And, you know, you need that reminder.
Yeah. So good.
Discipline, right? And I've got to wonder, because I feel like this pops up in our world too, of the discipline that you need to just keep it together, because we get these opportunities that pop up that would be like, yeah, I could do like that extra thing. I could actually just, I could make a little bit of extra content. I could add one more thing to the plate. How do you deal with that? Because I've got to imagine the inbound requests to like put this extra thing on your plate. It's not a W-2 level thing, but like, could you just make an extra piece of content for us, or could you do this? How do you handle that?
Dude, Mario is the ultimate plate protector here. The ultimate plate protector.
Help us,
Well,
Mario.
I appreciate that compliment. It has not come easy to me because I was not for a long period of time. And that was part of the overwhelm, was saying yes to too many things. Because when you're trying to get something off the ground, like, you have to say yes to a lot of things. You never know where something may lead, you know, a connection that you may make, whatever it happens to be. So, I mean, in the early days of working for myself, I said yes way more often than I said no, because I had to. I wouldn't say out of desperation, but you know, you're like, this thing is not, this ship is not stable yet. Like, I need to, you know, I need to say yes and give this a shot. And fortunately, like, a lot of those yeses have led to great opportunities that have allowed me to kind of just like stabilize this whole thing to the point now where inbound stuff comes in, my default answer is no. And I won't directly say that like right away to someone. I'm also like the world's slowest email replier in a lot of ways. Like, and it's not because I don't want to reply. I just sit with stuff for a while and I really think about like, okay, is this a worthwhile use of my time now? Because, you know, the ship's running pretty smoothly from a business standpoint. I'm very happy with how I allot my time throughout the course of a week. So if something's going to take up my time, it's taking away from something else. Like, it's going to take away from my coaching work, the work I'm doing on the newsletter or the podcast, or most importantly, time with my wife and my dog and my friends, and having a life outside of all of this stuff. And so I have to weigh at this point, like, is that worth it to me? Not just like from a monetary perspective, but is it worth it to me from like the amount of time that it's going to take away? Like, you know, is this going to lead to like a future opportunity? And do I need to do it? Like, is there a real good reason for me to say yes to this thing? And if not, the answer is no. And I say no a lot. So
They say, isn't there that quote, the reward for good work is more work? And it's funny, similar to the comment that Mike Wolf made to you. I was talking to Sally McRae last week, because she and I are co-hosting the Trail
right.
Running Hall of Fame
TrailCon,
show at TrailCon, and she's like, Dylan, like, how are you doing? How you doing? And so it just opened up a fun conversation where basically she made the same point of like, hey, you know, you got to like take care of yourself. You got to keep running in your life. She's like, you're not going to get less busy. You know, you have to like figure out how to do this, because I've always had this orientation of like, okay, say yes, say yes, say yes. It's going to work. It's going to work. It's all going to catch up. And then you can take your foot off the gas, right? And no, the truth is that it's not going to get easier. It's not going to get less busy. You have to just find a way to carve out the space for yourself. And I think a practical example of this from your career, Mario, is the way that you reimagined your relationship with your podcast, which is still very, very high quality and popular, but that it was part of this calculus of how am I allotting my time? What's overwhelming me? So for those who aren't familiar, share a little bit about the arc of the Morning Shakeout podcast, where it is now.
So I kicked off the podcast in 2017, toward the end of the year, it was December.
Again, you were early before it was cool.
Scott Fauble was the first guest of the podcast. And as I had mentioned a little while ago, I started listening to podcasts myself in 2015 or so. And I'm going through 2016, 17, and I'm like, I cannot find the running podcast that I want to listen to. And I have the connections and the chops to just make it myself because I've worked in this space for the last, at that point, 15 years or something, whatever it was. I know all the athletes, I know all of the people. I know that I can interview because that's what I did for my job. I should just start this thing. And so I did, and I kicked it off. And I was not as diligent about its regularity as I am with the newsletter. And then I tried to become a bit more diligent about it and put out a new episode every week. And again, this was just in this period again where I was saying yes to all of these things. I was trying to do too much. I was doing the newsletter every week. I was putting out a podcast every week. I'm coaching 20, 25 athletes. I'm traveling all over the place. Like it was just chaos. And it was it was unsustainable. Um, I still enjoy podcasts. I listen to them all the time. I couldn't do a weekly show anymore. I was pretty fried by the end of like 22, I think it was. And I was like, I need to reimagine my relationship to this. I can't put out a new one every week. And again, at this point too, like podcasts were becoming like sort of a dime a dozen. I was getting like, if I'm being totally honest, I was getting kind of annoyed because I prided myself on finding these, I wouldn't say like obscure guests, but folks who hadn't had a light shown on them for one reason or another. And I'd bring them on my show, and then within like a few months, they're on every other podcast in the space, which is cool for them. It's like, oh, well, more people found this person interesting, so they're making the rounds now. But it was just, the space was becoming crowded. My workflow was just not sustainable. I wasn't enjoying it anymore, and I was like, I need to just like take a break from this, and I did.
But this is important though, because like obviously there's economic incentives attached to the podcast too, in terms of your partners and sponsors who are supporting the entire Morning Shakeout ecosystem, and it probably requires hard conversations there. But at the end of the day, this comes back to where we started, of like you listening to like, is this serving me in the life that I want to build for myself? And for a lot of entrepreneurs, I mean, honestly, you learn to tamp down that voice, right? And push through all that stuff to the significant sacrifice or detriment to your personal health.
Yeah. So I'd have to look back to get the exact dates right. But since I believe it was 2022, we've had an annual partnership model. So I think it was the end of 2022. Like I was pretty fried with the podcast and just kind of in general, but definitely with the podcast and putting it out on that weekly cadence. And those episodes were accounted for through the end of the year. And I remember saying to Chris Douglas, who manages the business side of the Morning Shakeouts operations, like, can we just reach out to our partners and say, like, we're not going to do the podcast for the next few months, like cut them a check. Like I was going to pay them back. I was gonna be like, let me just like pay you back, because I was that fried on. He's like, I don't think that's a good idea. If you can make it through the end of the year, I think that would be a better way to go. And I muscled my way through the end of that year. And then when it came time to have conversations with those same annual partners for continuing things into the following year, part of the conversation was, hey, the podcast isn't going to come out every week, because I knew that I couldn't do that. And so I had to get through, like I did have obligations that I needed to fulfill, and we were able to do that. But going into the next year, I didn't commit to doing a weekly podcast because I knew I couldn't do it. And there were financial repercussions from that for sure. But the hit to just my overall well-being was not worth it. I needed to take that. I knew I needed to take that step back, even if it cost me money.
That I could feel that. We were doing 2 podcasts a week for almost a year, and even stepping back to 1 a week was a huge change, a huge weight off of our shoulders.
When you say we, you pretty much mean you.
It definitely made life a lot easier. And I can imagine stepping back even further. One of the things I want to ask you about, and we've talked about this a little bit already, but the things that we've said yes to have been in the service of evolving our platform. And you mentioned Substack recently, and I remember a while ago watching, when you kind of added Substack to the Morning Shakeout. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about that decision. And now that you've been doing it for a while, how do you feel about the decision, including Substack kind of in everything?
Yeah, I think it was about a year ago now. I think it was June of last year. I started republishing my newsletter to Substack. And I got that idea from Brendan Leonard, Semi-Rad, who you guys should totally have on your show because I think he's
Yeah,
just
we
a
should.
fascinating guy. And I've known Brendan a while. I've had him on my podcast. He and I have become friends. We're in touch all the time. And I noticed that he started doing that. And Brendan's had his own newsletter for a long time as well, but he was just cross posting it to Substack. And I just shot him a note. And I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, I'm trying it out." He's like, "A lot of people like to read newsletters on Substack." So he's like, "It takes me less than 5 minutes to literally copy paste it there and send it out to anyone who's subscribed via Substack." And, there's a network there. And I don't think I'm going to move it over there completely, which he has not, but I'm going to repost it there for people who want to read it on Substack to check out. I was like, "Huh, that's really, really interesting." Um, and then I was like, "Not to steal your thunder, you mind if I do that?" And he's like, "You can do whatever you want, man. It's fine." He's like, "It takes 5 minutes to repost it over there." And that's what I did for many months. I would just literally copy paste what was going out in the newsletter that week, and I would put it into Substacks. I had people who were starting to subscribe over there. And I saw that momentum build pretty quickly. And as I had alluded to earlier, it reminded me almost instantly of the early 2000s blogging days, which I have a real nostalgia for. And I was enjoying my experience on Substack. I read a lot of newsletters as well, and I was spending more and more time on Substack. And I was like, okay, I think it's smart that I'm republishing the newsletter here. The next question I need to answer is, do I just do it exclusively on Substack? And about, I don't know, 4 months ago, 4 months ago, I moved the entire newsletter over to Substack. So everyone who gets the newsletter now gets it via Substack. And it's, I mean, I just think it's kind of where you need to be these days. It's interesting. I mean, I like the experience of Substack. The deliverability is really, really good, but it also gets reposted to the web. And like, I could never get traffic info from my previous email clients of how many people read the web version, because it would be like a weird URL. It wasn't searchable. You couldn't find it. I don't think many people were reading like the web version. And now it's like the newsletter goes out to like 13,000 people each week. And I can look at the total views, which includes web views, and it's like over 20,000. And I'm like, huh, so people are definitely reading this like on the website as well. And if they're reading it on the website, they can leave comments, which you could do back in the blogging
Yeah.
days. Very, very familiar to me in that way. And people, at least from my readership, are really taking advantage of that. I mean, if you go look at the comments of my last like several newsletters, I mean, I'll get in there and reply to people too, which is what it's about. And you can kind of have this sort of like public conversation. And I wasn't having that previously. And it's added like a new level of engagement to my work, but also for me, and probably more importantly, a new level of enjoyment that I didn't have before, when it was just people singularly replying to the newsletter, which I also enjoy, but it was just different. Yeah.
It is very much like a higher tech resuscitation of the blog era. And you used the word network earlier when you were talking about blogs, and there was that time when there were, a couple dozen sort of prominent voices and bloggers and running. And I was, of course, focused more on trail running at the time. But yeah, then there was the network effect there where, they're linking to each other's blogs. So it's easy for readers to then go discover other people. Have you found the Substack networking tools or the discovery tools to be something that's helped the Morning Shakeout grow?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure how they work, but they work. I mean, I read a lot of newsletters myself, and not all of them, but many of them are on Substack now. And if you link to another writer's Substack, you can tag them in the email, and I think they get a notification for that. It might pop up in notes somewhere. Again, I'm not totally sure how it works, but I've definitely noticed like a network effect from that, where it's like, oh, so and so is now recommending your newsletter, or so and so found you, like, via this person's newsletter. And that's not something that was even possible the previous way that I was doing it. So there is like a little bit of magic there, but it's just kind of fun. Like, I've just found, like, I'm disillusioned with social media at this point. There's definitely a social media aspect to Substack, but like, I enjoy it. Like, I like getting on notes and interacting with people. I don't do it that often, but it's way better than any of the other places in the social media sphere. And, you know, it's just I don't know, it just feels like a corner of the internet where I want to spend time, and I can't say that about too many corners of the internet these days. So I'm more than happy to be there. And look, it's not perfect. I mean, I know people have complaints about Substack, and I heard some of those when I made the announcement that I was moving the newsletter over there. I mean, I had people who were like, you know, why are you moving to Substack? Like, they're a Nazi platform, this, that, and the other.
Oh, really?
Like, I'm going to unsubscribe, and I would engage in like an email conversation. I got some of them to be like, okay, I see where you're coming from with this. And it's because they were like on some social media platform and they saw something and they were like, well, this is what I believe now. And I'm like, look, I've been on Substack now for like a year. I don't see any of that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
literally has not come across my eyes once. If anything, I find it to be one of the most like engaging, supportive, positive places on the internet. And I'm more than happy to be there. And so
There is like there's something, it's hard to put your finger on what makes Substack special, but there is like kind of an energy to it that feels different and compelling in a way. And last week, my BPC was the How I Built This with the two co-founders of Substack. A great episode of that podcast if you haven't listened to it. And just this week, Emily Sundberg, who we talked about with, was it Austin who we had on the podcast, Lutzi, who works at Substack?
Yep.
We talked about her. Her newsletter is called Feed Me. It's one of the most popular newsletters on the platform. And if you look her up on traditional social media platforms, it's not like she has this astronomical following. You know, she's got tens of thousands of followers, but it's not millions. But I think it's representative of the fact that a different and creative minded person can be successful on that platform without necessarily being a quote unquote influencer on social media, which I think is kind of novel. But it makes me also want to ask you, Mario, because I really do think you've been ahead of these trends, you know, starting sending newsletters when really nobody was doing it and running, for sure. You were early to the podcast game. So like, you could speak about, you know, maybe what has helped contribute to your ability to maybe see around those corners, but also just maybe where media is going now and how you think about setting the Morning Shakeout up to maintain this, you know, prolific consistency and longevity that you've already had.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer to that for you. For me, when I started the Morning Shakeout and why I ultimately decided to do a newsletter is I thought about where are people spending their time, right? And I worked at competitormagazine.com. And so, you know, I knew how people got our physical magazine, what their relationship was to that. But I also saw how website behavior kind of evolved over the course of a short number of years, because we were getting a lot of referral traffic from Facebook, and then Facebook flipped the algorithm and we weren't getting as much referral traffic anymore. And then even what you could see on Facebook, sometimes it was like most of everything that you put out there, and then it was like not much of anything at all. And I mean, I just had the realization for myself too. I'm like, well, for better or worse, with smartphones, people check their email multiple times a day. Like, people are in their inbox. It's the one place that has not been sullied by the algorithm yet. But it's a sacred space too. Like, you can't just barge into anybody's inbox. At least I don't believe that you should do that. Like, people have to say, yes, I'm going to invite you in here a lot. So when I started the newsletter, I was like, I just want to be where people are, and I'm going to show up consistently at the same time every week. And I mean, that was based on my experience, but that was like kind of the bet that I made with the newsletter. And it's worked out pretty well as far as that goes. With the podcast, I mean, again, I created the podcast that I wanted to listen to because I felt like I could do that and have conversations that I would genuinely be interested in listening to and hope that other people would as well. And I mean, I guess I had foresight into that, but I couldn't tell you where it came from. I have no idea. I'm also willing to just try stuff and see if it works. And I've tried plenty of things that haven't worked too. So, I mean, I think I've gotten lucky with a couple things over the years.
Test and learn. That's what it's all about. One thing that really connects business and media in my mind is the metrics that we're all chasing. I'd be so curious to know, what are the metrics that you care about?
The only one that I care about most is the open rate. How often are people opening it? And I guess secondary to that would be the click rate. Like, are people clicking around in the newsletter to dive deeper into whatever it is that I've linked to? Because that's what I hope people do. I mean, I don't fully summarize everything that I link to. I summarize it like a little bit and I give my take on it, but hopefully it's compelling enough for someone else to go down that rabbit hole and check it out for themselves. And then maybe they'll email me back and say, hey, I read this piece. Here's what I thought about it. And we end up in a nice little exchange. And that's really like what I find super enjoyable about it. But beyond that, I don't look at unsubscribes. I don't look at who's signed up. I did in the early days. I definitely did in the early days.
Torture.
But I think anytime you're getting something off the ground, you're like, is this thing catching? Like, you do that. And then you get to a point where you're like, I don't care. Like, the people who are going to want to read this are going to sign up. And those who don't, I want you to unsubscribe because I don't want to be taking up room in your inbox. But I always look at the open rate. And that's been, I mean, incredibly consistent and stable for me over the course of 10 years, even as the list itself has grown. That rate has stayed like right around like 66 to 68%, like for a long time now.
So good. Is there anything else we should talk about as it relates to the Morning Shakeout in the 500th edition, or should we move to the Grand Slam track news? Because I'd love to get your perspective on this. I'm sure the audience would too.
I'm happy to talk Grand Slam track, but if there's anything else you're curious about as it relates to the shakeout or, the business model or how any of that's evolved, I'm happy to talk about it.
All right. Well, people should go subscribe to morningshakeout.com. Such a freaking great thing to land in my inbox every Tuesday morning. We'll have you back on for sure. We can go dive deeper into the business model and stuff like that too, but you've definitely built yourself a great, I mean, it's funny, coming back to where we started, like, you could call it a lifestyle business, and then there's like, especially in where we live here, Mario, and adjacent to Silicon Valley, that lifestyle business has a pejorative connotation, but
Sure.
you've done such a good job of building a business that does serve your lifestyle. And yeah, it's not easy, even when that's the case, but staying true to what you want it to be, listening to that, and having amazing longevity as a result, it's something to celebrate. And there's a lot our audience can learn from you.
Well, thank you. I mean, the last thing I'll say is I hope that the newsletter and everything that I do is a reflection of me. If it's not, then, what am I even doing? Like, then I'm putting on a show, but it's like, that's me. Like, I'm like, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to put out a quality product. I'm going to pay attention to detail. I'm going to try to give you some insights into things that, I found interesting or, shaped my perspective, in some way. And I mean, the best compliment that I ever get about the newsletter is someone will read it and they'll say, your voice comes out. And it's like, great. If it didn't, then again, like, what am I even doing? Like, this is very much like a personality kind of driven thing for me. Like, it is in, my voice. I want you to feel like we're out on a morning shakeout run, or we're having a cup of coffee together and we're just kind of shooting the shit about this, this sort of stuff. And, if it's not coming across that way, then I don't think I'm doing my job really well.
I mean, frankly, it's another thing that you were early to, in addition to just the practical, how things are being distributed, newsletter and podcast. Certainly you were ahead of the game in terms of the quote unquote creator economy, and knowing that people are going to follow you, Mario, and your perspective, not necessarily the brand of competitor or the brand of Runner's World or whatever. So,
well, this, I mean, I like cringe to say this, but it is like, the brand is Mario. The Morning Shakeout is a vehicle, like a delivery truck in a way of, like, what it is that I what it is that I do, what it is that I'm thinking about, that comes out every week. But I mean, I've done one reader survey in the 10 years that I've had the Morning Shakeout, and by far, I mean, this was several years ago, but I doubt that it changed. But by far, the number one piece of feedback that I got was essentially like more Mario. Like we want more of Mario's like perspective on this thing, because if it's just a roundup of news, like you can get that anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's like, and if you're writing about everything, like again, that's just like a roundup. It's like I'm picking out like the 5 to 7 things that were most interesting kind of to me that week, or that again are taking up like my headspace. So it is, very selective kind of in that way. And it's like, no, like someone else could do that for themselves, but they're not going to have like Mario's perspective on it based on like my history and my background and my point of view on things. So, yeah.
Good stuff. All right. So hard pivot to some news. Mario is in a good place to at least provide some clarity as to what we can learn from this. But yesterday it was announced that Grand Slam Track was suspending their season, effectively ending their inaugural season one race early. From my perspective, before I toss it to each of you to, share a little bit about your, thoughts on the situation. If you look at social media, as is not surprising, you see a lot of hot takes out there about like, oh, this is a big failure. Then you see the statement that Grand Slam Track puts out, and they sort of are putting lipstick on it, saying we are going to be back in 2026. But Grand Slam Track, I think I'm describing this right, Mario, was founded to be a sort of disruptive new quote unquote league for track and field athletes, probably a competitor to the Diamond League, which has been sort of the incumbent over time. It's helmed by Michael Johnson, the icon of icons for American track and field. At least there was huge prize money on the line. They were definitely taking a big swing at it. And obviously we can all respect people who are going into the arena that hard, especially in a small sport, trying to make a big difference. So with that as the preamble, Mario, I'll toss it to you first. What can we learn about Grand Slam Track?
Oh man. I think it remains to be seen. So rewind a few weeks. The last meet in Philadelphia, they so they have these different groups. They have like short sprints, long sprints, like kind of middle distance, long distance. The first two meets in Jamaica and Miami, they were over 3 days, and each athlete in all the event groups competes twice. And typically it was like, they in some of the events they'd compete back to back days, but in the longer ones especially, they'd compete like Friday and Sunday with a rest day in between. And so in Philly for the last meet, they cut out one of the long distance races. So they cut out the 5,000 meters, and it was just a 3,000 for the long distance group. So they're only racing one event. And because there was one less event, there was half the prize money. So the winner of each event group at each of these meets won $100,000, which is big money in track and field. Like it's, you win a Diamond League meet, you're not getting 100K just for winning that race. So for someone like Grant Fisher, who was winning the long distance event group, I mean, he made 100K in the first meet, made 100K in the second meet, and the third meet, the most he would have been able to make was like 50K. And that may seem like a small thing because they also had moved the meet from 3 days to 2. So which is why they didn't want to do 3,000 meters, 5,000 meters on back-to-back days. And like the first thought I had, I'm like, this can't be a good sign. Like this just can't be a good sign that like, mid-season you're going to iterate on some things, but this is like the format was pretty set. Now you're like breaking the format 3 meets in. And
for what you could assume was cost-cutting reasons.
Cost-cutting reasons, or, some of the feedback they got from the first few meets was like 3 days was too long to like hold people's attention type of thing. But either way, it was like, okay, this one event group kind of got hosed. I'm like, that's not a good look unto itself. And then I had heard some rumors that the LA meet, which was the culmination of the season, might not happen, or there might be some other adjustments that are made. And ultimately they announced yesterday, like the LA meet's not going to happen. And Michael Johnson had this kind of like, sort of bogus statement where he's like, we accomplished everything we wanted to accomplish in the first 3 meets. There will be a season in 26. And you're like, Yeah, no, you didn't. Like if you were like, we're gonna have this 4 meet season, the last one's gonna be in LA. It's a major media market, like it's a big stadium, like all this stuff. Like clearly, like something was not right if you're not even gonna host, that meet. And it's expensive. I mean, they're paying these athletes a pretty big appearance fee. Everyone's guaranteed. Like even if you finish last, like you're walking away with $10,000. If you win, you're walking away with $100,000. I think it was like 3 million in prize money that they saved by not doing this meet. The league raised like $30 million initially. One thing that caught my eye early on is like Michael Johnson was asked repeatedly, mostly by Jonathan Galt at Let'sRun.com, like, what's the revenue model? Like, how are you guys going to make a profitable business? And he just didn't want to talk about it. He's like, we're just focused on the experience right now and making sure it's great for the athletes and the fans. And he's like, yeah, but you need to make money. Otherwise, like, how are you going to be able to do this thing? Because you're pissing away like millions of dollars with every meet. And I mean, they weren't able to come up with a sustainable revenue model. And I think in order to have any chance of having a Grand Slam track season in some way, shape, or form next year, maybe it was necessary to cut this last meet just so they have a little more runway and maybe can bring on some major sponsors over the next however many months and have a season for next year. But it was kind of this disruptive, this disruptive idea where it's like, hey, we're going to prioritize competition. It's a different format. It's not, an all-day track meet. It's over in a matter of a couple hours. And I think like that part of it, the direction is right. Whether or not the execution was correct, I think still remains to be seen. But I mean, they were spending a lot of money and not bringing in nearly enough to kind of cover their costs.
Lucy,
Yeah,
comments?
you want me to follow that?
Well, maybe what you could talk about is, I mean, what we've seen in multiple non-traditional sports are these new disruptive leagues emerging.
Sure.
And
Shaun White.
Shaun
Yeah.
White, you've got the T100 and triathlon. There's other examples. Let me think of some others while you're talking.
Even in track, it's not a series,
Athlos,
but
right?
Athlos, exactly, which is women's only track meet in New York, like kind of at the very like kind of tail end, of the season, which did not conflict directly with Grand Slam track, but it's like, okay, well now there's Diamond League, there's Grand Slam track, there's Athlos, and you've got some athletes here and some athletes there and some athletes there, and that I think was a challenge for Grand Slam as well, because people are like, well, where's Sha'Carri? Where's Noah Lyles? Where's Jakob Ingebrigtsen? Type of thing. I mean, they had some big names, but they didn't have everybody there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, Live Golf is another example of this, where there's these new, super ambitious leagues, you can call them, that are trying to reimagine the fan experience in a way that also creates a sustainable, successful, lucrative business. And obviously it's really not easy, and we're starting to see the fallout from that with Grand Slam track.
You could almost consider them to be challenger brands in a way, where there's these big incumbents, these events that have been around for a long time. Using the Shaun White example, like, well, there is the Winter X Games. Is this a thing that needs to happen? Do we need to have another snowboard thing? We already have Ironman. Do we need a T100? It's going to split not only the audience, but also the athletes directly. And, people are going for this short-term win, but, they're competing against events that have been evolving for the better part of 2 to 3 decades. And, it remains to be seen if in the long term they will be successful. And I think Mario is right that you have to figure out these business models to go ahead with it. It's great that your original business model was to raise a bunch of money and then blow it to try to get something stood up, but long term you have to figure out how this is going to work. And you're fishing in the same pond as these other big events. There's not unlimited money to be spent on sponsorship of events, and that's really what it's going to come down to.
Yeah.
And I think in track and field too, I mean, Grand Slam track was great for a lot of the athletes. Track and field's a hard sport to make a living in, even if you're really, really good. I mean, if you're the Noah Lyles of the world or you're Jakob Ingebrigtsen, you're gonna be fine, which I think is part of the reason that they may have held out, because for them, it's like, well, I want to be world champion again. And, I don't necessarily like, yeah, sure, it's nice to have extra money, but I don't necessarily need the money because I'm pretty well taken care of. And if I win a world title, like I'm going to be good and bet on myself in that way. There are a lot of like very good, like international level track and field athletes across all of the disciplines. And let's be clear, like Grand Slam track, no field either. So the field athletes kind of got hosed by this whole thing. Like it's just track. And Michael Johnson even said, he's like, I'm not trying to save track and field. I'm just trying to save track, which is a whole nother discussion
Oh
for a different
God.
day. But you have like a lot of these good athletes who, might not get into a Diamond League meet. And if they do, they're probably not getting much of an appearance fee. And if, they finish 10th in the Diamond League meet, like they're losing money by going over there. Whereas, because Michael Johnson and team are making this league, I mean, this was part of the appeal. It's like, hey, we're going to have consistent matchups, throughout this, which is good for the fans. But for the athletes, it was good because they're like, they all got like a signing fee, like they just for signing on with Grand Slam track, like everybody got paid. And like if you compete, like again, even if you finish last, like you're gonna walk away with 10 grand. And for someone who can't even get into a Diamond League meet, it's like it's a no brainer, type of thing. It's like of course I'm gonna commit to this thing. Like I can actually, like short term, like this is a good way for me to make money. It might not last for a few years, but I'm definitely saying yes to this now because I'm gonna put some cash in I'm gonna do 4 of these things, and at minimum I'm gonna make 40K plus um whatever my signing bonus was, and that's a shit ton of money for
Yeah.
most track athletes, at minimum. And then if you place any higher than last, which a lot of them did, it's like that's way better than they could have ever done by trying to get into these small European meets and like hoping they get on the podium at USA's or Worlds or whatever it is.
I think maybe the most credible criticism that I saw online was just perceived lack of financial discipline in this way, but also in the way they organize the company and hiring a lot of really expensive executives. And of course, it's a startup and they had seemingly a lot of funding, but you still have to have a certain scrappiness and a cost saving consciousness when you're trying to build something from the ground up that it seems like some people at least feel that they lacked here in the beginning. But I do think it's a noble intention, right? Like one of the greatest track and field athletes of all time who probably doesn't have much of a, personal, like his legacy is secured as being Michael Johnson, who he is, what he's accomplished, to go and throw his hat in the ring here. And it seems like they're dealing with some very significant challenges, but still it seems like committed to pushing forward in 2026. But it does, at least to me, as I think about the business model, it's like, all right, you're going to need to nail down like a few huge paying sponsors. And now what kind of sponsor with deep pockets would come and, throw an investment behind something that's off to kind of a rocky start like this,
Yeah. I mean, the idea is great. The execution, I think, clearly
Yeah.
needs some work. So I hope that they can figure it out because as a fan, I love the idea of like consistent head-to-head matchups and, competition being prioritized over chasing fast times, and just the format's unique and different. And I do think it's very like viewer friendly. So I hope they can figure it out because I think track and field especially needs something like this just from a packaging standpoint.
Should we start Grand Slam Trail?
Ooh.
Go buy the URL now, Dylan.
Galaxy Brain? That'd be classic me. Just,
Add something
while
else to your
Mario
plate.
is plate protecting, I'm like, let's start a new league, and then completely bankrupt myself and everybody else. It would be classic Debo. What do you think, Lucy?
I'm here for it. Just let's send it. Why not?
Well, cool. Fun discussion here, boys. Should we close with BPC?
Let's do it.
Mario Fraioli, get us started, buddy.
Okay. Not necessarily related to the outdoor industry, but I just started reading this book right here. It's called Apple in China by a guy named Patrick McGee. And if I could sum it up, it would be this paragraph that I read last night in the opening chapter. Apple in China tells a huge untold story how Apple used China as a base from which to become the world's most valuable company, and in doing so, bound its future inextricably to a ruthless authoritarian state. And so I had heard this book talked about on one of the tech podcasts that I listened to. And I was like, I gotta pick that up. And I was in downtown Novato the other day. My car was being serviced. I was just walking around. I walked into Copperfield's books. I grabbed this off the shelf and I read the first few pages, and it reads like a thriller. but it's meticulously reported. There's like 45 pages of notes in the back. And I'm only, again, a few pages in at this point, but I am like hook, line, and sinker into it. So I would recommend that. I'm really interested to learn about Apple's reliance on China and vice versa, but supply chains and kind of how all that stuff kind of came to be. And I'm very just fascinated by this kind of stuff. So that's my BPC.
That's a good segue to a future episode.
Yeah, I think there's a future episode coming pretty soon here. I'm still unjet lagging from my last China trip, and I have so much to talk about.
Lucy and I talked on the phone last week, and he was just like, dude, this is like, it's the future over there. Like, it's like so far ahead. It's crazy.
Yeah, China blew my mind.
Oh, man.
I'll go next on BPC. On that note of traveling to China and traveling back, I actually have two quick ones. So I've got now a protocol that seems to be actually working for long distance travel, which you'd think by this point I'd have it pretty dialed in, but just recently it finally all clicked. I know a lot of people are probably heading over to UTMB and traveling really far for a lot of other stuff this summer. So hopefully this is helpful. I have two things. The first one, it's a neck pillow that completely changed the game for me. You've seen people travel all over the place, but like I've had all kinds of different options for sleeping on planes, and this one took me from like an average of 45 minutes on a flight to like 6 hours or more on a flight. Game changer. It's called TRTL, which I've got to imagine is turtle neck pillow. And it's not really a pillow. It's like this little brace that goes on one side of your neck, and then you wrap around with this little scarf thing. And so it packs down really, really thin when you're traveling, which is, of course, as you know, saves a ton of space. But this thing works so well. It just keeps your head in place and you can't dip forward or dip to the side. And so not only do you get like a ton of sleep, but your neck doesn't hurt. And I don't know, this thing actually changed the game for me. Like I said, going from like 45 minutes max on an international flight to like 6 hours completely changed everything. The other thing, shout out to our homie Jeremy Dunn, told me about this app called Time Shifter. It's this app where you put in all your flight info for your inbound and outbound flights, and it gives you like, hey, a couple days before, make sure you're going to bed at this time, make sure you're getting caffeine at this time. When you get on the flight, this is the time you should try to start falling asleep. This is when you should start looking at bright lights. Ask for a coffee on the flight at this time. And it gives you all this like insight as you're traveling. And then even when you get there, how to get on track quickly and then how to prepare for your flight home. So it's just this like simple app. And your first trip is like free or whatever. So if you want to test it out on a big international flight, highly recommended. So that's my travel kit. I also used the Momentous sleep pack for when I was over there. And yeah, this was for sure the best travel experience as far as sleep and jet lag that I've ever had. So I've finally figured it out after 45 years of punishing myself on international travel.
Look at you, your readiness score through the roof.
Through the roof, man.
I just looked up the turtle pillow.
Game changer.
Yeah. It looks like you sort of like are all cozy too at the same time.
So good.
All right, cool. I'll close this down. It's a very obscure selections here today, myself included, for BPC. I was going to recommend a book, but I'll save it for next time. What I today did my second blood draw for Function Health. Are you guys familiar with Function Health? It's, I think, one of these like kind of new wave health and longevity startups where you can just get deep insight into your personal metrics and therefore your personal health state just by giving a ton of your blood. The last 2 days I've gone in and nearly passed out both times. But it's I don't know. Coming back to what I said about Sally earlier, like I've definitely just been in a place where for a few years I've really sacrificed my personal health, and I'm finally taking steps to be like, okay, where can I invest and actually like figure out where I'm at and where I can improve, because I recognize that I really need to. Function Health, I don't even know how much it costs. Harmony got me all set up and signed up and scheduled on my appointments for me because she's great. But I don't think it's ridiculously expensive. I think it is probably like a high priced subscription, several $100s a year, but that you can go in and do fairly regular check-ins to see how you're progressing against the baseline. So anyway, I'm just getting started on this now, but it does seem like a pretty amazing product if you think about, because it is convenient. You just go to a Quest lab and you sort of give some insight to function as to like what you're dealing with, what you want to improve. So they sort of curate what they are going to test you for. And I'm already starting to get results back. I did my first blood test yesterday. I'm already getting results back. I'm sure over the course of the next couple of weeks, I'll have a ton of actionable insight to actually improve my personal health. But also the user interface, just like it feels like a really cool, cutting edge new health product that our audience might derive some value from. So just wanted to share a personal experience there as a BPC. Bada bing, bada boom, boys, we did it. Mario Fraioli, thanks for coming on Second Nature. You're the man, buddy.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you guys for what you do with this podcast and your community on Slack. It's pretty special. So appreciate you both.
Closing thoughts from you, Aaron?
That was one of my favorite podcasts, actually. That was so fun.
So good.
Thanks for being here, Mario.
Thank you.
TheMorningShakeout.com. Subscribe. Peace out.